Hello and welcome to ILO Live from the International Labour Conference in Geneva. You join us as over 5,000 worker, employer and government delegates come together to discuss how to ensure we can build a future with decent work. One of the key considerations of that discussion is how to ensure how workers can have the skills that employers need and that are needed by the jobs of tomorrow. To discuss the issue and to take your questions, I'm joined by three ILO experts on skills and the world of work. I'm joined by Heinz Kuller, who's our Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, by Olga Stretska-Alina, who is a Senior ILO expert on skills and employability, and Srinivas Reddy, who is the Chief of our Skills and Employability branch. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us. Now, I've got some questions lined up for Olga, for Srinivas and for Heinz, but this is your chance to put your questions to the experts. So please do post them here on Facebook, and we'll get to them during the course of the interview. Now, Heinz, if I can turn to you first. The world of work is changing fast, and with it, the skills needed by employers and by the world of work. Could you give us an idea of the current trends in the world of work and perhaps what to expect from the future?
Yeah, first of all, good afternoon to everybody who's listening, and thank you very much for the question, which is actually a very important question. As many of you know, we are in the middle of a so-called fourth industrial revolution. Since it's the fourth, it's not really new, but it is a challenge in whatever phase you are. So what's going on now? We have the so-called mega drivers of change, which is actually the technological revolution, which is digitalization, robotization, artificial intelligence, and so on and so on. We have also other mega drivers of change, like, for instance, the demographic challenge or the ecological challenge. All this has a major impact on the world of work, and the world of work, as we know, will change for sure. So we have to accept that there is a change, and the question is, how do we adapt to it? Now, many people are too much techno-oriented. However, the ILO, as the tripartite organization bringing together government, workers, and employers, will have to look at the social dimension of it. And the social dimension is actually, in particular, the question of professional qualification of skills. The kind of bad news is that, with one set of skill, you will not survive to your entire professional life. So the mega trend there is what we call lifelong learning. From the cradle to the grave, you will be requested to learn, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because that keeps life interesting, obviously. So therefore, we will have to see how this works. To give you a concrete example, when you look, for instance, at a car garage, it used to be a typical case for a blue-collar worker with an oily rack. These days, if you go to a garage, you see a very clean environment with people working there called mechatronics. That's the future of work, how it's likely to look like. I stop here.
Okay, you used the word mechatronics there. Could you just quickly explain that for us?
Mechatronics means you have really to understand whatever is in the car in terms of electronics.
Okay.
So you are no longer only looking after an engine, something mechanic, but you have to look also at the mechatronics, which means the electrical equipment, all the onboard computers, and so on and so on.
Okay, thank you. Srinivas, if I can come to you, we've heard Heinz talk about the car sector there, but I wonder if you can give us an idea, amongst other sectors, what are the trends we're seeing in the changes of skills that are being demanded?
Thank you, Adam, and hello, everyone. Some of the profound changes we are seeing in a number of sectors, but as Heinz said, one of the sectors that is clearly affected is the digital economy, and a number of sectors affected by the new technologies. The way the jobs are delivered and jobs are expected to be kind of serviced is very much influenced by new technologies. If you look at digital economy and the jobs that are associated with digital economy, so we are now talking about platform economy, gig economy. So the kind of occupational changes require a new set of skills. So almost in every occupation, you need to see what kind of additional dimension need to be added, be it digital skills or some new technological dimension. So the notion of one job for the entire life is changing for almost all occupations. Occupations are changing, and therefore it is time for us to really also learn to learn on a continuous basis for a lifelong learning curve.
Okay, thank you, Srinivas. Now, Olga, if I can turn to you, we've heard both Heinz and Srinivas say that one set of skills is not going to be enough for your career, such that it is, and one career isn't going to be the situation for most workers nowadays. Could you give us an idea about the kind of skills that will be in demand, and perhaps more on the skills that are in demand right now?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you also for inviting me. Building on what I just heard before and taking into account of all those mega drivers of change and the changes also ongoing in terms of sectoral composition and penetration of the digital content in the sectors. There are several trends also on the skills side. And of course, what you hear the most is the whole substitution effect from new technologies, that the robots are coming and taking jobs from workers. And what is actually a little bit neglected is the whole potential of new technologies to create jobs. And there is a huge potential, especially in the value chain. And that goes beyond just the jobs which are created for taking care of the digital infrastructure, for example, or the technology infrastructure more broadly, but also in the value chain, all those people who are taking care of software, those who take care of data analytics, marketing, and so on. And in terms of just one driver, technology, what kind of impact does it have on skills? Of course, one would say there is an upward trend in terms of skills demand, and this is true. This is what we see actually around the world, even if we look at the past data, relatively to the skill composition in countries of all income levels. The demand for skill, higher level skill, is rising. But there are very many factors that actually influence that. So if we look particularly at the technology, it's not only higher education which will be under demand. So it's not only those who innovate new technologies, but also those who make a business case of technologies, which means managers, leaders, marketeers, those who operate technologies, maintain technologies, design them as well. So these are all vocational education and trained workers. So these are basically skilled workers. And therefore, of course, it puts a lot of pressure on vocational education and training. And this is just one driver. If we look at other drivers, such as, for example, globalization. In the ILO, we have this program which is called Skills for Trade and Economic Diversification, where we work directly with our constituents at sectoral level, helping them to identify which business capabilities would help them to improve their export performance in the sector and overall increase productivity and competitiveness. And there we actually have implemented that skills for trade and economic diversification across many countries of the world in over 20 sectors. And there are the same types of skills which are coming up again and again, such as skills related to export management, skills related to quality control, to food and safety, foreign languages knowledge, and so on. So this is also an example where it's not only high-level skill, but the whole variety of technical skills, as well as core skills. And core skills, this is a specific thing, which is kind of soft or generic skills, which are transferable from one job to another. They become a real comparative advantage for individuals because they become a kind of a employment security mechanism, allowing people to be employable across different occupations and sectors.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's opportunities out there. It's not a question that jobs are just going to be destroyed. There's jobs being created at the same time, and with the right set of skills, there are opportunities for people to get the jobs of the future. So this is an important point, Heinz, I think, as we talk about the future of work. Sometimes it gets quite technocentric. It sometimes gets around robots are coming, going to destroy our jobs. And the future of work is something that the ILO is discussing right now as part of its Future of Work initiative. And in fact, we've convened an independent global commission on the future of work, which is discussing skills as one of the aspects of its work. Could you give us an overview of the scope of that initiative and perhaps a little bit on the commission?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Just very briefly, I think it's really important to stress with new technologies, there are new opportunities, but there are also new challenges. But I mean, maybe also our work life will become easier because kind of tedious forms of work will be abolished or will be taken over by robots. We should not forget that dimension of it as well. Yeah, coming back on the future of work. So first of all, I mean, the International Labour Organization has been founded in 1919. It's the last survivor of the so-called Versailles Treaty. So we have quite a history, and I would just like to remind everybody that one of the reasons why we founded the ILO is social justice is a precondition for peace. People tend to forget it in the daily kind of life. Now we are coming up to our centenary in 2019, and obviously the future of work is an essential question for the ILO. It's not only about the future of the work, but also about the future of the work of the International Labour Organization. Therefore, our Director General has called a so-called Global Commission comprising 28 eminent personalities from the world of work, a kind of think tank, to see what the future of work may hold, what kind of answers we can give to all the questions which we have right now. For instance, what kind of new forms of jobs, what kind of new forms of work, what's the role of trade unions, of employers' organization, what's the role of governments, and most importantly also, what is the job, how can we adapt to these new forms of work by lifelong learning. It's one of the kind of 5-6 top priorities of that commission. Now this commission is being chaired by the Prime Minister of Sweden, Mr. Löfven, and by the President of South Africa, Mr. Ramaphosa, which already shows the kind of global approach on this entire issue. So we are not only discussing the problems of the developed world, but we are also discussing the problems of the developing world, which I think is very important. Basically, somebody told me once it's not only about problems along the Rhine, it's also about problems along the Nile. So, voila, that maybe sums it up. So this commission is at the moment in the middle of its work. They will produce a report by the beginning of next year, and it will be then the job of the International Labour Conference about the International Labour Conference in 2019 to turn this recommendation into action, how to deal with the future of work, and also how the ILO is supposed to be dealing with it in terms of changing our working methods, adapted to the necessities, and lifelong learning and skills, upskilling, avoiding a skills mismatch, which is also a very big problem, that people are being taught things which they don't really need in the labor market. All these questions will be addressed by it.
Thank you, Heinz. Now, if you're just joining us, we're discussing the kinds of skills that will be needed by the jobs of the future. I'm joined by 3 ILO experts, Heinz Kuller, Olga Stretska-Elina and Srinivas Reddy, who are ready to take your questions on the issue. So please do post them on Facebook and we'll get to them during the course of this interview. Now, Srinivas, one of the things that Heinz just mentioned there is this is not just a developed world issue. The demand for skills is changing in developing countries as well and emerging economies. You were recently, until recently, director of the ILO office in Bangladesh. Could you give us a perspective on how the trends in skills are changing in developing countries?
Oh, yes. Bangladesh is, I think, almost in the transition to middle-income country. It's at the lower middle-income status now. So if you look at Bangladesh, it's a very classic case of transition and, embracing the structural change. It still continues to be, agrarian dependent to a large portion of the GDP, but their ambition and aspiration is to move towards more of manufacturing, but also service sector. So ready-made garment sector, for example, constitutes 13% of the GDP of Bangladesh, employing 4 million workers directly. But they have plans to kind of diversify into other sectors. They're looking at pharmaceuticals and chemicals, information technology, also leather and leather goods, and shipbuilding and ship recycling. So from ILO, what we are also very keen to provide assistance to the member states is to, based on the preferences that the country wants to choose in terms of their economic growth path, such preferences will have to be well informed that those opportunities for employment creation, if they're job-rich, economic sectors like the ready-made garment sector, preparing people to be able to embrace those economic opportunities is an important lesson that we learn. And as countries, prioritize what are the new economic sectors, as part of the globalization, countries have opportunity to kind of diversify and look at what are the opportunities that the human, potential can take advantage of. And we clearly see it a very classic example in Bangladesh, where from agrarian economy they're moving into manufacturing and aspirations to increase the service sector, and that is as part of the structural transformation. That's a very good thing to be done. The challenge is, how do we prepare people in terms of skilling to be able to embrace those economic opportunities? And clearly, if you prepare people, be it in information technology or any economic potential that the country has based on the natural resources maybe, or even human resource potential, there is a possibility for transformation. And in respect of a number of lower developing countries, but also the middle income countries, clearly that is the service that we would like to offer, anticipating the skills needs based on the sectoral preferences that they want to invest in economic growth. So, anticipating the skills needs for the next 5 to 10 years and preparing the, human resources by gearing up the education and vocational training and skills development activities clearly aligned to the market demand, so that you're able to kind of match between the supply and demand, supply from the vocational and training institutions and market demand. And big lesson that we learn is the more we do this in close collaboration with the private sector, but also in active partnership with the workers' organizations, the likelihood of success of keeping the skills relevant to the market, so that there is no loss in terms of the human resource potential, but also the young people that are entering the labor market have a very clear guided opportunity that, okay, here are the market opportunities in this sector, and if they get trained, they will be able to kind of get absorbed in this sector.
Thank you, Srinivas. Olga, Srinivas talked about transformations, transitions, and anticipating skills needs. One of the big transitions that we're seeing right now is the transition to a green economy. The ILO recently published a report, the World Employment and Social Outlook Report on greening with jobs, and in it talked about the way in which we're transitioning to a green economy. How will that have an impact, firstly, on jobs, and then on the skills that are needed to fill those jobs?
Indeed, it's an important driver of change, and one of cornerstones of our work, actually, skill needs anticipation, as well as diversification, because it's also the way to diversify economy, as well as diversify the energy sources, going more into greener ways of producing energy and other goods and services. So the report which you mentioned, Greening with Jobs, has been looking also into skills component, looking into the results of 27 country studies. And in fact, we collaborated with the research department, because it was a continuation of what we did some years ago. In fact, 8 years ago, we had a study among 21 countries. So we could actually compare what the progress is, and it's very interesting. So the advantage of this new report is actually that they also produce some modeling when it comes to jobs. And what they say, of course, some jobs will disappear, some jobs will be created. This we know for a long time. They actually have managed to quantify that. So they say around 6 million jobs are likely to be destroyed in case we stick to the scenario of our commitment to decrease temperature by 2 degrees by end of the century. And the projection is by 2030. So if we stick to that scenario, around 6 million jobs may disappear, mostly in fossil fuel energy generation, which means for skills development, these workers have to be retrained. And ideally, they have to be retrained preventively before they become unemployed. That means there is, of course, a big room for social dialogue, and also for joint kind of action between active labor market policy, social protection mechanisms, and lifelong learning strategies. But what is actually quite positive, they also predicted that around 24 million jobs will be created out of this greening agenda, the transition to the greener ways of production and services, greener goods. And that is very positive. Most of those jobs will be appearing in renewable energy sector, in energy efficiency, which means also it's the construction sector, which is hugely affected. In manufacturing as well, recycling, remanufacturing particularly. But this all can happen, this 24 million can materialize only if we have brains and hands to implement that ambitious strategy. Otherwise, it will not really be implemented. And what is perhaps even more important from the skills development point of view, they also projected that around 1.5 billion jobs will be impacted by the green transition. What does it mean for us? For us, it means that all occupations for these 1.5 billion jobs, which means well-established occupations, will have to be adjusted. That's adjusting vocational education training system, competency standards, curricula, teachers training, everything. It's enormous for all those occupations which are regular, such as plumbers. So plumbers become green plumbers, electricians become green electricians, teachers, they are very important for the delivery. So maybe they become green teachers, but also leaders, managers, scientists, Adam, Heinz, Olga, and Srinivas, all of us. So this is what is really important. The size of the question is enormous.
So you say it's an enormous task ahead of us.
Absolutely.
And as you said, it's across all different professions where skills are needing to change. And we talked about lifelong learning earlier on. It sounds something that's going to be expensive. It's going to cost money to ensure that we have this training pretty much in all societies as skills demand changes. And in fact, we have a question coming in from Marimba, who says lifelong learning sounds very good, but training costs money and salaries are not necessarily going up. So how are we going to pay for this transition? Maybe, Heinz, if I come to you first. I mean, you're regional director for Europe and Central Asia. In Europe, in the last few years, we've been experiencing public spending cuts in some countries. How do we equate that with increasing spending on skills and training?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need a change of mind. We need to realize that education is not a cost, but it's an investment. And I think increasingly many countries, also in my region, realize that they have to invest in money. Just to give you an example, I have been visiting Azerbaijan a week ago, and Azerbaijan is quite an oil-rich country, but they have understood now that they have to invest the money, the profits from the oil industry, in their educational system, into dual vocational training, and they start doing it. Because skills will be the new gold of the future. I mean, if we talk about digitalization, skills will be basically the currency which you need. Now, obviously, education is an important thing, but it's also a mistake to think it's only public funding which comes into play. We also need to look at the possibilities of kind of private funding. What do I mean with it? First of all, I think if we talk about avoiding skills mismatches, I feel that the system of dual training, be it for vocational professions but also for academic professions, in other words, this combination between work in an enterprise, get trained in an enterprise, and get your theory in schools, in university, this is something which is very important and which should be supported. But it also means if I'm an apprentice somewhere, I should get a wage. And therefore, the role of employers and trade unions to negotiate it. Also, the role of employers or organizations and trade unions to develop curriculum for the education is very important, to be as close as possible to the needs of the labor market. And that's what we need. What we also need is a kind of infrastructure around it. It starts with schools. So we need schools where kids do not get only the basic literacy, but also get computer literacy. I mean, that means they have computers in the schools, and that means they are connected to the internet. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But it goes on from there, and therefore, and then it goes on to the enterprises where they need to build on this and then provide the ideal training. So that's about it. And then in the end, we also need public employment services. So in case people have a training, they become redundant, then a functioning public employment service needs to help them to retrain, to upskill, in order to be able to find a new job based on an analysis of the public employment service, where new jobs and new skills are needed, and really train the people towards that direction. I know that requires a lot of flexibility from people, but I'm afraid that's the way how it's going to be in the future.
Okay, thank you. So we're looking at, there needs to be policy coherence, first of all, between employment departments, education departments and other departments in governments, and then joined up thinking between the private and public sectors, a real kind of partnership on making this change happen. Is that true, Srinivas, in most countries? I mean, you're looking at it from the skills and employability branch at the ILO. Is this something you're seeing as a real need to actually make that transition to a change in the skills that young people, but also lifelong learning?
Clearly, in terms of the understanding that since, one job for life is no longer relevant for many occupations. So the lifelong learning has twin, dimensions. One dimension is to learn. The willingness to learn at different points in our career. So it's not just about learning an occupation in the beginning of when a person is very young, but if the job is transforming, and some jobs may disappear. So the willingness and attitude to learn is also an important angle. Then one would explore, okay, what are the other options if I have to, change my job after 5-10 years. So that's an important core skill that we are really looking at. The second dimension you also mentioned about the financing part of it. Obviously there is no one solution fits every country, but a combination of options, including what Hein just said, obviously government has a role to play, but we see that there are a number of international processes and partners discussing this precise question. You see this as part of the G20 discussion, also as part of the Future of Work Commission. What are the various options available for supporting lifelong learning? It has to be obviously the individual-centric learning. So the individual has to be kind of ready and willing and pursuing and having that ambition. But what options might be available from the private sector, from the government, from the other financial institutions? So it has to be broad-based, and we are seeing that already happening. A number of member states are encouraging learning, to be able to transition from one job to another job, or add to the new dimension of the job. For example, a driver has to learn now digital technology, how to operate a mobile phone, and understand GPS system. So it's just no longer only a technical skill, but a combination of other core competencies. I think that is clearly seems to be the way forward.
Okay, thank you, Srinivas. If you're just joining us, we're here discussing skills and what skills are going to be needed by the jobs of the future. I'm joined by ILO experts, Srinivas Reddy, who's the chief of our skills and employability branch, Olga Stretska-Elina, who's our senior expert on skills and employability, and Heinz Kuller, who's our regional director for Europe and Central Asia. Now, we've got some questions coming in now from around the world, from a young person here. If you're a young person entering the labour market today, we've talked about policy, we've talked about what the ILO is doing, but really practically, young people coming out of university or out of school are starting to think, what skills will I need? And Sandra asked, which skills will be useful for young people to develop as they enter into the workforce. Olga, if I can come to you on that.
Yes, sure. Well, I think there are several advices which I can give. The first advice is treat your investment into learning as investment, not the cost. But of course there is a consequence to that sentence, because if we approach it this way, then there is of course an expectation from people who go through the learning process to have a good returns. And it's difficult enough in the current situation on the labor market as it is, with not enough jobs available, to make a career choice, let alone the career choice which would pay back. But my advice, nevertheless, would be to first of all think about what jobs will pay back. Where can I get decent work conditions later on? And I would perhaps prevent young people from making choices based purely on kind of prestigious societal ideas, because we see a lot of that in many, even low-income countries, but especially middle-income countries, and quite some high-income countries as well, where people engage into higher education studies and they cannot find a job afterwards. And of course that's partially because the economy doesn't create enough jobs at this level, but it's also very often because the economy doesn't need that many economists. It's just really oversupply of them. Not that many lawyers and so on, but perhaps plumbers, and this is the job which may pay back. So of course we are all struggling in many countries of the world, and here in the ILO also helping countries how to increase the reputation of vocational education training, and this is part of the solution. Another advice which I would give, go through any type of practical experience. ideally apprenticeship training. This is really the best solution, and that doesn't have to be only at the level of vocational education and training. Nowadays, apprenticeship is really spread to higher education as well, if they want to do, but it gives them a huge comparative advantage over other young people that they already have practical experience and also potential access to jobs where they are already engaged. And then, apart from that, of course, there are some areas where employment is quite certain in the future. For example, the care economy, especially all medical professions, everything related to healthcare, due to the aging demographic process in all high-income countries and most of middle-income countries too. This is a certain choice. The same comes to any type of STEM-related occupations, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics occupations. But they are sometimes overrated. It's interesting, actually. A few weeks ago, I was participating in the panel in the International Telecommunications Union about digital skills, and it was one of very successful IT companies that said, invest into creativity. It doesn't matter whether you learn creativity while coding or doing arts, as long as you learn the creativity, and this is what helps you in the future.
That's great. Thank you, Olga. Just a quick question coming in also from Catherine in Islamabad. You said, skills are the gold of the future. And if skills are the gold of the future, perhaps Srinivas, how can we ensure that developing countries are not left behind?
It's a very important question. For the developing countries to be able to kind of respond to the changing needs, very important to invest and increase the investments in education in general, but particularly technical and vocational education and training that is relevant to the labor market needs. This is very, very important because the possibilities of leaving behind are very high for various reasons, including the reasons, for example, how far the particular country is able to kind of also embrace the technological change, access to technologies, access to those markets that are associated with new technologies. For example, certain societies are smart enough to be able to see the opportunity given by a digital economy, and they can have those jobs in that country. So for the LDCs, the least developed countries also should be able to kind of forecast those market opportunities as part of the globalization, embrace the change in terms of investing in new technologies, and particularly important also to invest in the education and training of the people that can be responding to the demands that the new technologies are offering. So it's a very important investment that the LDCs will have to make.
Thank you, Srinivas. Now, it's an enormous issue that we've been trying to cover in a very short space of time. We've covered good ground this afternoon, but we are coming to the end of our programme today. So I wondered if I could turn to all three of you, and if we can be as brief as we can. Just to say in closing, for you, as we look to the future, as societies are changing, as employment markets are transforming, what for you are the key measures, or one key measure, that can be taken to help improve that transition and ensure that people have the skills needed by the future of work?
Well, I think it's most of all maybe a psychological question. So don't be afraid of change. Embrace change. You will hopefully get the support you need in terms of training already starting at school. And don't rate professions. What I mean by that, it doesn't matter whether you are good at an academic job, at a vocational job, do what you are best at. And that's also appeal to parents, actually, because I know how that is. Because parents very often think, if my son or daughter doesn't make it to a university, he or she is a loser. It's nonsense. I know a lot of people, I'm from Germany, I know a lot of plumbers who earn a lot more than a bad lawyer. So, just go for it.
Thank you. Olga?
Well, I think since we discussed lifelong learning, the huge challenge which is imposed by the pace of change in the future and people needing to learn, relearn, unlearn, and then learn for a new job, but perhaps I think we need to find the policy solutions and systemic solutions that would put individuals at the center and that would allow individuals to access training and to access funding through some kind of individual learning entitlements, and that doesn't mean that has to be fully funded by governments. It could be co-funded by the private sector, individuals and governments, as long as the solutions are there. And also, I think I would build on what Heinz has said. I think we have to raise the generation of risk takers with an attitude that it's okay. It's okay to enter a job and not make a perfect choice. It's okay to withdraw. It's okay to try another qualification and another job and another job. It's all right. Be composers of your own potential qualification and be job creators, not only job takers. I think this is the message I would like to give. Thank you.
Be composers of your potential qualification.
Yes.
I like that. Srinivas, a couple of closing words.
Thank you. At the ILO, we are looking at what these global mega drivers, are impacting, how they are impacting the skills. If skills is the new currency, the three changes and the two, movements. The changes are the technological change, the climate change, and in terms of, the demographic changes. So these three changes, but also the two movements, movement of large number of people through refugees and migrants, and movement of capital through the globalization. So these 5 mega drivers, what are the implications for member states, either as a challenge or an opportunity to be able to kind of embrace that opportunity and skill and reskill. So that is where we are coming up with country-specific strategies to support the member states to be able to respond to these challenges, but also embrace the economic opportunities by skilling and reskilling and retraining people.
Wonderful. Thank you, Srinivas. And thank you, all three of you, for a really interesting discussion. Thank you. And thank you for watching and sending in your questions. You can find out more about the ILO's deliberations on the future of work and the Global Commission on the Future of Work by going to www.ilo.org, where you'll find lots of more information. Now the ILO live broadcasts continue, and we have the next one coming up at 5 o'clock Geneva time, which I believe is 3 p.m. GMT. That next one is on universal social protection and can it be achieved. But for the moment, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.